Amid the mounting hysteria about the coronavirus, it was easy to miss the apparent peaceful conclusion of our longest ever war in Afghanistan. A couple of weeks ago, the United States concluded a peace deal with the Taliban. It is a deal that was dishonoured before the ink had even dried. Actually, it looked more like a concession of defeat by the United States. Whether it is as ignominious as the withdrawal from Saigon in 1975 remains to be seen. Accordingly, our military presence in Afghanistan is no longer serving any useful strategic purpose. I argued over 3 years ago that we needed to bring our forces home from both Iraq and Afghanistan. The same is true today. Let's bring our people home without any further delay. While the initial moral and legal case for action against the Taliban for harbouring the infrastructure and personnel of the bin Laden network was beyond reproach, our involvement there could easily have ended in 2002. The rapid rout of the Taliban forced bin Laden into Pakistan in exile. Our involvement could have ended at that time. For nearly 2 decades, we have squandered the lives of some of our best people and resources in attempting to rebuild a fractured, deeply religious society in our own image. This mirage was pursued under the guise of nation building and counterinsurgency, which is a military tactic entirely contingent on the presence of a credible local political ally and a population which is susceptible to improved material living conditions. Neither our enemy nor most of the population of Afghanistan have ever been for sale. We have neither the time nor the resources to waste on this folly any longer. Corey, I suspect we're in agreement on this. I saw you talking on Paul Murray Live about it the other night, and Jim Molan had expressed his deep regret that we'd gone without having established clear aims and so on, and I felt deeply for Jim's personal feelings, but I think it's been a terrible strategy for a long time.
Catherine, you were right 3 years ago. You're right now, but I want to preface my comments by not recognising the service by those personnel that went over there and have been doing a mighty job because we've asked them and expected them to do it.
Every one of them. I knew some of the guys who died
there. Of course, and some of my friends have lost their colleagues and things, and it's a deeply personal thing to say this was a folly. So I don't like that word, but, you know, in the end, it's been a disaster.
Yeah.
It has served no material purpose in the last decade or more. I don't think we've got a credible political ally there. The elections are not credible. But I'm going to say this. The Australian forces and our nation has to stand at one with the United States. It has to. We couldn't have walked away from this before the United States made the decision to do it. That's my view of it. And it took someone with the courage of Donald Trump, you might call it surrender or appeasement or whatever, but it took someone to have the courage to say, no, we're going to get out of these foreign wars, bring our troops back home, because successive or previous US presidents haven't done it, and that hasn't allowed Australia to make the choice.
He made a very explicit promise about walking away from the longest wars, and I agree with him on it. I think folly was certainly not a term to derogate the service of our troops. You know, I stood at Amberley Air Base and watched caskets being taken off the aircraft and was there with the families and chiefs of army. And it is very, very galling to see young people put in harm's way when there seems to be no national strategy or will to win the war. And that's my objection to it. Our people did everything required of them and more. And it's in some of the stellar efforts there. Three people awarded the Victoria Cross in that conflict, and other innumerable acts of incredible sacrifice and courage. But my argument is that you don't put your people in harm's way unless they're supporting some discernible national interest. And I'm sorry,
Catherine,
getting kids to school in Afghanistan, if their own families aren't willing to die to do it, why should our kids die to do it?
So, Catherine, you think we should have done it before the United States 3 years ago, 4 years ago, irrespective of what that impact would have had on our relationship?
I agree with Corey. I agree with Corey that we are definitely tied to the US as an ally. But the mission that was originally agreed, and people forget this, it was a unanimous Security Council resolution, UNSCR 1378. Even China and Russia voted to actually attack the Taliban after 9/11. There was global unanimity at that time. I think we went in and smashed their training camps, removed their infrastructure, and the obvious thing to do after that was to monitor the situation from carrier-based groups in the Indian Ocean and strike do decapitation of leadership targets as we did when we ultimately killed bin Laden. But this long-term nation building, it sort of blows off our discussion earlier, Antoinette, about the nature of Islamic militancy around the world. These people are highly motivated, they're not for sale, and they're fighting an Afghan army that we've been pouring thousands of dollars and lives into to have in return blue-on-blue attacks where they've killed the people that are training them, and they've broken every time they've been exposed.
Arguably made us bigger targets and hasn't lessened terrorism.
Well, again, there hasn't been coming back to your...
They haven't had a safe haven in Afghanistan.
There's been no 9/11 since there's been no major attack on US soil. I'd argue, though, I think the one thing that has happened over this conflict is the Taliban have been bloodied and we've damaged them severely. I suspect they're not up to continue the struggle offshore. I think they just want to go back to running Afghanistan the way they did before, which was as a medieval theocracy, essentially.
With opium fields.
I think that's a question, isn't it, for a lot of us listening to what you say, Catherine, is that, as you say, there was a moral imperative to go in. There was unanimous consensus after the events of 9/11 in 2001. And then where do you draw the line? Because is there a risk of these conversations that the next time something like that happens, that where we're called to be part of an international response and go in and take military action, that we're going to say, well, we're never going to get out? Because there were people that said that, didn't they?
Certainly, they said it more about Iraq.
More about Iraq.
The Iraq invasion. And by the way, I've got to own up to it. I supported the invasion of Iraq. I believed deeply. When I saw Colin Powell address the United Nations, I believed him. I believed there were WMD in Iraq, and in the current climate at that time, it was appropriate to disarm that state. He was refusing to comply. I regret that now, I think. And I regret it for real political reasons, not moralising kind of reasons of the US as the great Satan. I disagree entirely. I think the US has a global mission. It is the indispensable nation still. But what has happened, and Trump has read it this way, the attrition of American power and resources in Middle Eastern wars that have been interminable, where it has been impossible to tell friend from enemy, frankly. In the end, the much acclaimed surge in Al Anbar province really came down to buying off tribal leaders to kill Al-Qaeda. That's what we were doing. We were bribing local sheiks to go out and kill
My thing is, I think if you speak to the layperson, and in the context of we've spent $10 billion, we've lost about 41 lives. What were we there for? Could you tell us why we went to Afghanistan?
Absolutely.
I bet most would have no idea. They would not be able to explain why we were there.
The original mission was to disrupt entirely the capacity for Al-Qaeda, which were being nurtured by the Taliban, and was capable, as they demonstrated on 9/11, of mounting global operations outside Afghanistan. They were issued an ultimatum, and on October the 7th, 2001, Bush had an authorisation to use force and did so. That war had been won by the time the Bonn conference was held in Germany amongst the interested powers. They installed an Afghan government. Maybe a force could have remained for a period of time to help stabilise the country. But look, people are saying, oh, what's going to happen now that, the Afghan girls won't be in school anymore? I'm sorry, if that's an issue for the Afghani people, then they've got to have the fight,
but
not us.
Catherine, let's go back to our troops. Right? Many of them are damaged and suffering because of the endless rotations. They go over there and it's been 6 months and another 6 months, another one, and they're coming back, and we're seeing the morale in the Australian Army diminished. We're seeing a lot of veterans suiciding. We're seeing it's an extraordinary toll, and I think the Australian people, if they were asked about it, would say, why are we there? What are we doing it for when these people are not grateful for what we're doing? That's the perception.
And I'm absolutely with you on that, Corey, and I think that's what damaged a lot of our people, is that in the end, too much of the fighting fell on the Special Forces group. They were being rotated. I know one SF officer who did 11 rotations for Afghanistan. Many did 5, multiple deployments, because the government, and this is not the Army's fault or the Defence Force's fault or our soldiers' fault, the government were casualty averse. They didn't want our troops fighting in the conventional way they did in Vietnam.
So there was no confidence, and this brings me
And they threw the SF group into all the heavy lifting and tried to...
So when they don't have confidence in their institutions, things go south.